Hello and welcome to the 3D Blu-ray Bunker. This is a place for us die-hard fans of 3D where we exclusively look at 3D Blu-rays and almost entirely focus on the quality of the 3D on offer. So whereas most reviews will focus on the film itself with a short comment at the end about the 3D, here we do things the other way around. Today we're looking at Hobbs Shaw, the 2019 Fast and Furious spin-off film. The aspect ratio is 2.39:1 and the film's 3D was post-converted rather than being natively filmed. This is an interesting release in as much as the film didn't get any 3D screenings in US cinemas or here in the UK. Unusually as well, there's no 3D Blu-ray release over here either, so it's our 3D loving friends in Germany who had to be relied on for this edition. Because of its limited 3D availability, my hope had been that this might be something of a relatively unseen gem, one of those low-key 3D releases that every 3D Blu-ray collector needs to get shipped in to add to their collection. So let's have a look at what most of us didn't get the chance to see in the cinema, but what we can now pay over the odds for to get to see at home. Things start promisingly with this nice nighttime shot of London, which has a reasonably wide stereo base and works as a good introduction. I always like it when a 3D film begins with a decent 3D shot, and this film really does just that. And soon after that we get a point of view shot from the cybernetically enhanced Idris Elba, and the 3D is done in a really nicely creative way because his internal overlay screen places its various readouts at different depths rather than what would have been more obvious, which would be to have them all on the same plane. So it's really starting to look here like the conversion team is going to do some interesting things with this film. After a very quick explosive blast that more suggests pop out rather than actually delivering it, seeing as it's all over in just a few frames, we get an opening montage of the two leads, Dwayne Johnson and Jason Statham, with several shots of each of them placed side by side showing their contrasting lifestyles. Each of the pairs of shots here shows them doing the same things in the same types of location, and it really does look as if the composition of each partnering shot is the same on both sides of the screen, with the same amounts of depth in each shot. Which is surprisingly smart from a 3D point of view, but it does create a small problem though, because the right side of Johnson's frame and the left side of Statham's frame often have a clash of depth, so it can be a bit of a mild eye twister. And unfortunately, after the promising start, things get fairly mediocre fairly quickly. We get to see the other lead here, Vanessa Kirby, running over this bridge, and for the first time you start to get the feeling that maybe the 3D could have been implemented a little bit better. Shots like this, where the view is loaded with a natural perspective, can look fantastic in 3D, and particularly bridges, which is something I've photographed literally dozens of times in 3D over the years. They can make for superb stereo shots, but here it's just a bit ordinary. It's not terrible, but it's nowhere near as good as you know it can be. That's really something of a theme for the 3D throughout this film, I think. There are quite a few shots that are strong in their natural perspective view, like the views here from above and below on these guys abseiling down the side of a building, which have got huge amounts of perspective. And the same sort of thing in this view looking down a cliff face from later on. These are absolutely ripe for great 3D, or here in this underground vault full of cars, which ought to be a great looking piece of 3D with its multiple layers of arches. But these shots just aren't as good as you feel they could be, because you've seen other films with similar views where the 3D is done much better. And as always, I have to assume that this is how the filmmakers wanted the film to look, and it's their movie, not mine, so I'm not saying that their use of 3D is wrong, I'm just saying it's not particularly impressive. This chase scene through London streets is done a little bit better, and it's possibly one of the nicer 3D moments, but it's not exactly reference quality stuff. There's more of what seem like wasted opportunities with this room, which looks tailor-made for good 3D, so much so that you could assume that 3D was being given serious consideration during pre-production, and like this location here too, which is loaded with things all over the place, ideal production design for good 3D. Or the venue here where Ryan Reynolds turns up with the overhead lights and rows of seating. It ought to be another strong 3D moment. Or again here in this workshop where the production stretches deep into the set and sparks fly in the foreground. But really, as before, the conversion doesn't do as much with them as you'd expect or want. There's a shot where Jason Statham is behind a glass wall covered in writing, which should be another really strong 3D moment, but by this point it's no surprise to see just how mildly the effect is applied. It's like virtually the entire film never makes you doubt that it's in 3D. Every shot has some depth, it's just never as much as you'd like. Cityscapes and buildings can often look really impressive in films when they ramp up the depth to make a hyperstereo view, but they don't really make much effort to do that here. There's clearly some separation between the buildings in these views of London, but nothing especially interesting. The most interesting thing about this view of the bad guys' headquarters is that in reality this is the McLaren Technology Centre in Woking over here in the UK, which presumably ties in financially with the fact that Statham drives a McLaren in the film. And actually there was another location that kept me interested even if the 3D didn't, which is after this establishing shot to let us know that we're in Moscow, which obviously means you get the obligatory view of St Basil's Cathedral in Red Square. The film goes to this grand mansion set in a landscape which could barely look more English if it had a Mini with a Union Jack on the roof driving in front of it. In this location, which looks a bit more Russian to me than the Buckinghamshire countryside of the previous shot, you can imagine how good it could look in 3D, but as you can guess from what I've said so far, the 3D in your imagination is going to be much better than the rather insipid treatment that it gets here. And the same with this view moving through the Samoan hills, which offers another opportunity to make for a really interesting stereoscopic view, but it's just all so conservatively done. This bit where one of the characters ejects from a plane lasts for just a few frames, and it doesn't have the chance to offer the kind of pop-out that you might expect, as it's far too brief and the 3D is too mild. And I think it's scenes like this that reviewers who aren't interested in 3D will often lazily say something like an ejecting pilot flies out into your face, but here he really doesn't. Had the film though been planned for 3D and the 3D had been done well, that is exactly what would have happened. Ending on a positive, we get another view from Idris Elba's supervision, this time I think where he gets another layer of information through his crash helmet's visor, and it's multi-layered again in its depth, which means it's moderately pleasing, if only for a very brief moment. And there's a fight in the rain where the 3D comes to life. Like a lot of the action scenes in the film though, there is still some fast editing going on here, which is never really beneficial to great 3D, but the scene does have my favourite 3D shot in the film, which is this top-down view of the fight in the rain. And this is a shot where the 3D really does look genuinely excellent. It's strong, immersive and interesting, and it's right at the end of the film. So, like I say, the film is unquestionably in 3D throughout, it's just hardly ever impressive. It's not a disc that you'd ever go to show off how good 3D can be. So sadly then, it's a bit of a Friday afternoon conversion effort, I think, from the often excellent Stereo D, and on balance, maybe this is one to leave to the Germans. So a very quick word about the film itself. On the whole, I quite enjoyed it. Things have come a long way and become massively more ridiculous since the original Fast and Furious film. And whilst that's mostly a good thing, this one does perhaps outstay its welcome a bit with quite a drawn-out final act. It's definitely at its best when the two stars are having a go at each other, which makes for some fairly funny scenes, and it's this relationship between Johnson and Statham that's the main reason to see the film. And the humour gets even better in the brief moments where Ryan Reynolds and Kevin Hart appear. There's lots of action, obviously, presumably most of which is the CG variety, but all of which was done well enough without being particularly special. And I thought the whole thing could definitely have done with being about half an hour shorter. But unfortunately these days I think studios seem to think that high-profile action films aren't really allowed to be less than 2 hours. So I hope you found this in some way useful, and if so, I hope you'll join me again for another 3D Blu-ray review. Until then, thanks for looking in on this one. Cheers for now. Bye-bye.